Hello everyone and welcome to this video in which we are discussing the verbal and RC section of CAT 23 and the second slot of CAT 23. Now the idea behind the video, we have talked about this earlier, but we'll do that again. The idea behind the video is not to give you lessons on let us say any inputs and so on, but to give you an idea of what the exam was like, to give you an idea of what the nature of the questions were and how it is that those questions could have been approached to maximize the, let us say, not just the number of attempts, but also the accuracy with which you do it. So do remember that when you take your CAT, the focus really is to do both, is to get as much as you can going for you, both in terms of accuracy and in terms of attempts. Now that means really effective reading. I mean, with the verbal segment, it requires that you read really effectively. So what we are going to be doing today is handling this paper, in the course of which we will also look at, let's say, particular tasks and ask ourselves whether that's a task we'd want to take up right then or we'd like to take it up later on, depending on our level of comfort. So typically when you approach the test, you really do have to work out the sequence in which you want to attempt your questions, because there are some you'll be comfortable with and some you won't. So assessing that level of comfort as we go along is also something that we will try and do. Okay. So the idea then, after you've heard this video, is that you have a sense of how best you could go about tackling the CAT and maximizing your score as you do it. So that's the idea behind it. So let's get started then. We are talking about RC passage to begin with, but to determine whether we want to do it or not, or defer it to later in the attempt, we just have a look at the question statements. So according to this passage, which one of the following statements best describes the significance of archaeology for historians? So we know it's going to be about historians and archaeology. If the author of the passage were to write a book on the Battle of Hastings, which is again history, along the lines of his or her own reasoning, the focus of the historical account would be, so that means it's actually about historical writing, it's about historians and the writing that they do. And so we have historians, their writing, and archaeology. The next question says, all of the above, if true, can weaken the passage's claim that facts don't speak for themselves except. Now this doesn't tell me anything about the topic, but the first two did. And the fourth one says, all of the following describe the common sense view of history except, which means we are looking at historians, archaeology, historical writing, and what would be determined as a common sense view, which means we are likely to see something that we can probably handle as we go through it. So the reading might not be terribly difficult, especially, okay, so if you were a person who had absolutely no exposure to history and no idea what it was like, and you actually hated it, then you might want to defer this to later. But for most people, archaeology, history, and let us say talking about how people present their ideas in history, in historical writing, is not going to be too difficult to manage. So in the sense of your priorities, this would probably be higher in your priorities and you would probably take it up earlier on. So let's try it then. The positivists, anxious to stake out their claim for history as a science, which means they're talking about a particular school of thought who believed that history was actually a science, contributed the weight of their influence to the cult of facts. That means they were influential and they actually contributed that to the whole business of historical facts. First, ascertain the facts, said the positivists, then draw your conclusions from them, which is what basically is what we call positive reasoning. This is what may be called the common sense view of history, which means you should be able to understand history after you got the facts. History consists of a corpus of ascertained facts, corpus meaning a whole body. The facts are available to the historian in documents, inscriptions, and so on, which means you can actually draw these facts from historical records. Now, Sir George Clarke, let's say, contrasted the hardcore of facts in history, namely the corpus of facts, with the surrounding pulp of disputable interpretation, which means people might have interpreted the facts differently, and therefore there's going to be some amount of debate about the facts. He says, but there are facts, and let's keep them separate from or recognize that they are not the same thing as the debate that happens around those facts. So he contrasted the facts with the surrounding pulp of disputable interpretation, forgetting perhaps that the pulpy part of the fruit is more rewarding than the hard core, which means in doing this, he probably forgot that the attraction of history really is interpretation, not so much just the facts themselves, but what the facts might mean. So it recalls the favorite dictum of the great liberal journalist C.P. Scott, facts are sacred, opinion is free, which means C.P. Scott and George Clarke both had this opinion that facts are paramount everything else is open to people's, let us say, understanding, right? So, what is a historical fact? According to the common sense view, there are certain basic facts which are the same for all historians and which form, so to speak, the backbone of history, which means things that have been recorded and found and have been assessed from historical records are historical facts. The fact, for example, that the Battle of Hastings was fought in 1066 because this has been recorded. But this view calls for two observations. In the first place, it is not with facts like these that the historian is primarily concerned. He is not really concerned about when the battle was fought. He is concerned more about why it was fought and what the outcome was. It is no doubt important to know that the great battle was fought in 1066 and not in 65 or 67, and that it was fought at Hastings and not at Eastbourne or Brighton. The historian must not get these things wrong. But to praise a historian for his accuracy is like praising an architect for using well-seasoned timber. That means you praise a historian for being accurate. You are saying it's a good thing you actually found all the historical records. So it's like praising an architect for using well-seasoned timber or properly mixed concrete in the building. It is a necessary condition of his work. So the historian must have facts, but not his essential function. So that means we are going back to the view where the essential function is how do you interpret those facts. It is precisely for matters of this kind that the historian is entitled to rely on what have been called the auxiliary sciences of history. So to be able to interpret, you add to the facts the other things that you can add to it, namely archaeology, the study of, let's say, monuments and of artifacts and so on and so forth, epigraphy, which is the study of writing, numismatics, in other words, the whole business of coinage, chronology, which is how it is that people actually measure their time and their day and so on and so forth, which means you have all these you've got the facts, but to interpret these facts, you have these additional sciences that can actually be used. Okay, so the second observation is that the necessity to establish these basic facts rests not on any quality of the facts themselves, but on an a priori decision of the historian, which means to say that the facts are actually good facts to use is not about the facts, it's about how the historian went about collecting those facts. What did he decide to do to be able to gather the facts? In spite of C.P. Scott's motto, that is, facts are established and opinion is free, in spite of C.P. Scott's motto, every journalist knows today that the most effective way to influence opinion is by the selection and arrangement of the appropriate facts, which means you have the facts, but how do you select them? What facts do you select? What do you go about selecting, and how do you arrange it? That is what the person says. It's an a priori decision. That means it's a decision that the historian takes and the journalist takes even before they present the facts. So they already decide which facts to present and how they want to arrange them. It used to be said that facts speak for themselves. That is, of course, untrue. They have to be interpreted. The fact speaks only when the historian calls on them. That means only the facts that the historian presents actually get to speak. The ones that he doesn't decide to present, they don't speak. It is he who decides which facts to give the floor. That means which facts he is going to allow will speak and in what order or context. The only reason why we are interested to know that the Battle was fought at Hastings in 1066 is that historians regard it as a major historical event. It's because historians interpret it as a very important battle that we pay attention to it. But why would they do that? They interpret it as an important battle because of the outcome, because of the way they saw the things develop after that. And that could also be a matter of interpretation. Okay. So, it is basically the only reason that we are interested to know that the battle was fought at Hastings in 1066 is that historians regard it as a very important event. Professor Talbot Parsons once said he called science a selective system of cognitive orientations to reality, which means you decide only on those things that you really want to use and you actually relate them to what is real. In other words, he said science is also manipulative. That means people manipulate facts to suit the science that they want to present. So it might perhaps have been put more simply, but history is among other things that. That means even history is where historians choose what facts they want to present, when and how. The historian is necessarily selective. The belief in a hard core of historical facts existing objectively and independently of the interpretation of the historian is a preposterous fallacy. That means it's a mistake to think that the facts just exist and the historian has no role in actually presenting or interpreting them. But one which is very hard to eradicate. But people really believe that history should only be facts. That means a lot of people believe that history lies in facts, whereas what these authors are telling us is, while facts are really important, what is actually equally important and attractive in history is the fact of what the historian actually presents and how they interpret those facts to be. So that's what this passage is about. Not difficult, as we decided when we saw the questions. It is going to be something about history, historical writing, and the way people present their ideas. Archaeology, was brought in, as we realize, only as one of the tools that people use to interpret history. So we've got the passage there. Now let's look at the questions then. According to this passage, which one of the following statements best describes the significance of archaeology for historians? So we understand now that archaeology is just a tool, one of the tools that a historian uses to present, let us say, his interpretation of or her interpretation of the way they believe history to be important. So is it that archaeologists help historians carry out their primary duty? No. Is it that archaeology helps historians to locate the oldest civilizations in history? No. Is it that archaeology helps historians to ascertain factual accuracy? It's a tool, so it helps them ascertain. So let's just keep that there. Archaeology helps historians to interpret historical facts. Now, we could possibly look at both of them. So does archaeology help historians interpret, or does archaeology help historians to ascertain factual accuracy? Let's just go back. It says here that it is a necessary condition of his work, but not his essential function. It is precisely for matters of this kind, right, that the historian is entitled to rely on what have been called the auxiliary sciences. And the auxiliary sciences, so for the point is, when you say, if you go back, you're saying, to praise a historian for his accuracy is like praising an architect for using proper materials. It is a necessary condition of his work, but not his essential function. Not his essential function. It is precisely for matters of this kind that the historian is entitled to rely on. That means it's a necessary condition, it is a necessary condition, and therefore you're entitled to rely on certain things that help you ascertain those facts. Now the point is, we are not saying that, so the person does say that the way the person interprets those facts is actually what makes history, let us say, exciting. But to interpret facts, you must have them. It is actually the backbone. To interpret facts, you need to have the facts, and that's the backbone. Now, to be able to get that backbone, to be able to have that backbone, you are entitled to rely on. That means there are tools you can use to get that backbone. So it's entitled. The word entitled here would mean that every historian can actually use this. Every historian can use these things, and we know that these things are things from the past. We know that they are actually things from the past. Archaeology is artifacts from the past. Epigraphy is writing from the past. Numismatics, coinage from the past. To do what? To establish what the facts are. So these are evidence of the facts. So the point is, there are the facts, then there's the evidence of the facts, then there's the interpretation. You realize the evidence is not the interpretation. The evidence does not help you interpret. The evidence helps you establish the truth. Then you choose to connect things and interpret. So really the answer can't be 4, it actually has to be 3. So archaeology helps historians ascertain the facts themselves. It is evidence of the facts that they're going to use, and then they might proceed to interpret those facts. So archaeology helps historians ascertain factual accuracy. So 3 is your answer to 1. Let's look at the next one. If the author of the passage were to write a book on the Battle of Hastings along the lines of his or her own reasoning, the focus of the historical account would be the reasons for the battle and the outcome of the battle. Because he said establishing the factual nature of the battle is fine. But why is it exciting? Because you consider it to be an important event. Why is it important? Because of what caused it or because of what it caused? So it actually is important because of its place in history. It's not important as an event per se. It's important because of its place in history in the development of, let's say, what happened before it, after it, etc. So if you were to write a book, would it be a detailed timeline of the various events led to the battle? Just a detailed timeline, or a composite of the reasons? Not just a detailed timeline. Exploring the socio-political and economic factors that led to the battle. Exactly. Why did the battle even happen? What were the reasons for its happening? Also, what followed it? That is also there. So if I have a choice that gives me both, I know that 2 is very clearly part of my understanding, which is he would really wonder how the battle came about or what brought the battle about. But he would also consider it's important because it happened and caused certain things. So if I have something that gives me the causes, rather the effects along with the causes, I would probably look at that with a lot more interest, right? So, but I will hold 2 there just in case there is no other answer. Providing a nuanced interpretation by relying on auxiliary sciences, that's not good enough. The fact is the auxiliary sciences help us establish the truth. It's not about the interpretation. The interpretation is the author's interpretation when he connects ideas. But is it about auxiliary sciences help you interpret? Auxiliary sciences help you establish the facts. So it's not 3. And that too, we are talking here, but about if you were to write a book on the battle along the lines of his or her own reasoning. And we said the reasoning is that the interpretation is as important as the facts themselves. And therefore, how would he consider the battle actually came about? So 2 is better than 3. Deriving historical facts from the relevant documents and inscriptions, that's all, that you're just establishing the fact, right? It's like relying on auxiliary sciences. Because you're looking at archaeology and you're looking at epigraphy and you're looking at numismatics, you have relevant documents and inscriptions. So 3 and 4 are very similar. The point is they only help establish the facts. But his interpretation is the facts are the corpus. What is interesting about them is how you actually interpret them in terms of what caused them or what they could cause. So I have what caused them, I don't have a connection with what they could cause, it's not here. So 2 then is the best answer I have, because it tells me about one part of the interpretation, which is the causes. It doesn't tell me about the other part of the interpretation, which is effects, but I don't have that possibility here. So 2 then is my answer. Let's look at 3. All of the following, if true, can weaken the passage's claim that facts don't speak for themselves except, which means it's the historian who has to interpret the facts keeping in mind what else he knows. And therefore 3 statements can actually weaken that. Except, which means 3 statements say no, the historian has nothing to do except gather the facts, right? So, except. Now, facts like truth can be relative. What is fact for person X may not be so for person Y, which means how do you interpret it? Do you take it to be true always? Do you take it to be true sometimes? Do you take it not to be relevant at all? So, what is fact for a person X may not be so for person Y. So, this is close to, it's close to what the author is saying, but it definitely doesn't weaken the claim. To weaken the claim, you have to say, no, the facts are paramount. Interpretation doesn't matter. Okay. So, a fact by its very nature is objective and universal, irrespective of the context in which it is placed, which means the fact is what is important. The context is not. And therefore, the fact is paramount, its interpretation is not as important. So, this would actually weaken the passage if it were to be taken to be true, right? Then, the truth value of a fact is independent of the historian who expresses it, which means what exactly a fact delivers to people as truth is not dependent on what the historian actually interprets it as. Fine. So, if that's true, then that also weakens what the person is saying, because he says interpretation is as important, if not more, than just the fact itself. The order in which a series of facts is presented does not have any bearing on the production of meaning, but he said the historian selects first of all facts and also arranges them and presents them in a certain sequence to be able to deliver a certain interpretation, which means if 4 is true, then that doesn't support the argument either. So 2, 3 and 4 weaken the passage's claim, or weaken the author's claim, where he says the historian selects facts, arranges facts, interprets facts. And so 2, 3 and 4 mean that the historian has nothing to do about it and facts are facts. So the exception that we want is 1. Alright. Now let's look at the next one. All of the following describe the common sense view of history except. And the common sense view of history is that the facts are facts, isn't it? That's what it actually says. Over here he says that the common sense view is get the facts, then draw your conclusion. That means you can't, the common sense view is you do interpret facts, but you must have the proper facts. So what is that then? So if we say all of the following describe the common sense view except, that means 3 of them correspond to that particular understanding, 1 doesn't. So history is like science, a selective system of cognitive orientation to reality. But what we said the common sense view was get your facts, establish your facts, and having established your facts, then look at what you interpret them as. So that's the common sense view. Now the common sense view wouldn't tell you select the facts. The common sense view would not say select the facts, pick the one that you want, then look at how you want to present them. The common sense view would be establish all your facts, draw understanding from them, not select what facts you want to deal with. So the exception would appear to be 1, but we look at the others also. Real history can be found in ancient engravings and archival documents, which is establish your facts, look at the records that you have. History can be objective like the sciences if it is derived from historical facts. That means just as science would be objective if you actually looked at all the facts that you have. Similarly, history could be objective if you look at all the facts that you have. So that's also the common sense view then. only the positivist methods can lead to credible historical knowledge. Only. Let's look at that. We are saying the positivists, right, anxious to stake their claim, contribute, and they first ascertain the facts as the positives and then draw your conclusions, and this is what the common sense view is. So the common sense view corresponds to the view of the positivists, which means I would actually accept 4 as well. So the positive methods can lead to credible historical knowledge according to the common sense view. Don't forget, we're not saying according to you or me, according to what the common sense view is. And the common sense view corroborates a positive view, which means it's a positive method that can lead to credible historical knowledge. So that is also what we can derive. So from the discussion, we know that we'd accept 2, 3 or 4, but not 1, because the common sense view says get all your facts, gather all your facts and derive interpretation from them. They're not saying, the common sense view doesn't say select your facts. So that's what historians may do, but then that doesn't correspond to the common sense view. So 1 is the exception to this question. So that finishes this passage. We can look at the next